Thanks very much for inviting me to join you today. I'm not an educator. Somebody asked me that last night at dinner, and I said, no, I'm not an educator. My background really is the corporate world. I've been hanging around corporate America for about 35 years, primarily in human resources, where I was an HR leader at both BP and Amoco, and at a mid-sized company in Chicago, GATX Corporation. And the last 10 years or so, I've been on the dark side. I've been consulting at a couple different firms, and I'm going to speak to some experiences from my last two jobs that I think reflect very much on what Jeff had talked about today. It was interesting. As I was reading the book, I was kind of thinking about it from four different angles, because I'm an alumnus of Michigan State, and I'm also a product of the box. And I've had a good career, but I really understand kind of the need for change. I'm a parent. I have had two sons graduate in the last 5 years. Knock on wood, they're both gainfully employed and have found something that they really like. But I know that that's really maybe many times the exception and not the rule. I'm going to provide my comments from two other angles. One is my corporate experience, and really my last consulting experience, as well as some work that I've done in the early career space. Jeff talked about the needs of the 21st century, and by virtue of being in the consulting world and getting access to a whole lot of organizations, as well as being an HR leader myself, I get a great opportunity to peer into that world and see what's going on. Most recently, my company, we did interviews last year with 16 corporations, senior leaders from these corporations, and our primary purpose was to talk to them about leadership, but we started off with a couple questions about the business and what's going on in your business, and what are the challenges that you're facing. And really the comments that we got back, number one, were remarkable, and number two, there were a lot of themes. Now this was a wide variety of companies and industries. We're talking about big global companies like Motorola and Whirlpool. We're talking education. We're talking not-for-profit and healthcare. What was interesting to me was to see the similarity of the themes, the information that was coming back to us. And basically, one of the interviewees used this phrase. He goes, our business model is under attack, and really business as usual is just not the way we can go forward anymore. We have to think about things differently. And it was this, and this is no surprise to, I'm sure, anybody in the room. It was a combination of just this rapid pace in technology, of the global marketplace, of politics and Washington, D.C., and political regulation, and the twitchiness of Wall Street just makes, there's no such thing as change management anymore. It's just change, and it's just this constant state of chaos. So they said, our business model is under attack. And the second thing that they told us was that we need to refocus our culture. And we need to be much more innovative, we need to be much more collaborative, and we need to have a much more engaged workforce to be able to stem off the competition and to meet our customers' needs, which are changing dramatically along with all the other changes, excuse me, in the marketplace. So I thought those were three interesting words. We need to be innovative, we need to be collaborative, and we need to be engaged. If you start digging deeper into that, and we had these conversations like, how do you create that, and how do you create this culture? And they said, we need different kinds of competencies and different kinds of skill sets in our organization. We need to lead a different way. So they started just to tell us about the kinds of competencies that were either included in their competency models in general, or specifically, just the kinds of competencies that were really important. And there were many of the things that make up the T. There were flexibility, it was adaptability, it was communications, it was interpersonal relationships, it was resilience, it was critical thinking skills. And they said, these are the kinds of competencies that we need in our organization to be able to create that kind of culture that's going to allow us to succeed into the future. And I thought, again, it was interesting to me that you would talk to 16 such different and varied companies and hear kind of the same things from them, with, again, a real focus on competencies. So that's the most recent experience I've had, just to give a sense of what I think Jeff talked about as the needs of the 21st century, and it's very real. And it's a very demanding situation for organizations. I'm going to transfer over and tell you a little bit about my work in the early career world. At my last firm, we did a lot of the same kind of consulting we do at our firm now. It was in change management and executive coaching and leadership development types of things, but we also did a lot of work in the career space. We did a lot of outplacement, and we did a lot of career management projects with organizations. And as a result of that, we were a pretty known quantity in Chicago, where our business was. We had a lot of friends of the firm, clients, customers reaching out to us and said, you know, you guys are in this career space. Do you think you could sit down and talk with my son or daughter? Because they're really kind of lost. And we had so many requests for us to sit and do that. We decided to do a pro bono workshop. We said, we can't do these one-offs. Let's try to put together a workshop and really help these young people kind of figure things out. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice this morning. I don't know what's going on. So our first workshop had 20 young people. Most of them were in their final year of college. Maybe about a third to 25% had already crossed over, and they were either unemployed or they were underemployed and really unhappy. So we would go through a process, and there were two of us that did the workshops, and over the course of 3 or 4 years, we did about 15 workshops and had about 200 young people pass through. And these were good, smart young people out of really great universities who were really struggling. And we saw some things that I likened to kind of a crisis. We saw people who were just directionless. I think Jeff mentioned that a little bit. They just didn't have kind of a connection going into the future. They couldn't really tell you what they wanted to do or why. They couldn't even, in great terms, explain why they majored and what they majored in. So there wasn't any kind of compelling thing coming that way. The second thing that we saw is they were totally inarticulate in how to share their offer to the marketplace. Their resumes at best were unremarkable, and at worst were just really terrible. And they couldn't really speak in what we called the language of the marketplace, which we used Phil's 12 critical competencies from the Trends report as an exercise. And we said, let's sit down, and this is the language of the marketplace, these 12 competencies. And you need to talk the language of the marketplace, and you're not really talking the language of the marketplace. That's one of the reasons you're stalling. You don't come across very effective. You don't come across with much confidence. And we would break them up into little small groups of 3, and the goal was, we want you to come back and tell us what, of this list of 12, tell us 3 competencies that you have, and an example to prove it. The good news is that they could do that. I mean, they really could. They could come back and they could say this was, and it was really kind of compelling. Now you start talking about how do you change your resume around. The bad news to me was that they came into this workshop, and sometimes they're 2 or 3 years out of college, and they couldn't talk that way. So if you think about the real, again, Jeff, you said the needs of the 21st century, if you really think about what's going on in this chaotic world that they're walking into, not only for their first job, but also to set a foundation so that they can be successful for life. I think that's why the loop thing at Stanford is so interesting, that there's a real strong importance to help our alums, not only while they're in college, but to continue to learn and grow so they can be successful in their career. So those are my 2 comments from my recent experiences that I want to share with you, and let me turn it over to Chris.
Great, thanks. Good morning, everyone. I want to thank the conference organizers for the invitation to be with you this morning, and to thank Jeff for those thought-provoking remarks. Duncan, you said you're not an educator. I know of your work as a member of the advisory groups for MSU, and I think you are both an educator and, as it turns out, a researcher as well. So thank you for those comments. We talk about the connection between education and industry, and I think about what are the core products for education. When I think about that, it comes down to 2 things. We are about knowledge and skills. That's what higher education is about, that combination of knowledge and skills. However, as Duncan has just indicated, that often means can present a difficulty for students in translating the knowledge and the skills that they get on the campus into the work setting. And that's why learning as a process is so important in connecting that learning, that knowledge and skills with the responsibilities that students are about to undertake. When they are unable to do that, they find themselves frustrated and discouraged. When we think about that learning process and the T-shaped professional, the T-shaped organization, whether we use the T-shape as a model or the degree qualifications profile as a model, as is being used in about 500 colleges and universities today, or the tuning work that's being done, we see that what is happening is a recognition that we need to make the implicit explicit. We know that learning is happening on our campus, but we need to make those implicit understandings explicit. We also need to focus more on competencies, whether it's the DQP or the T-shaped professional. We are looking for helping students to identify what can they do, not just what do they know or what can they write about, but what can they actually do? What are their competencies that will build the confidence when they're 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 20 years outside of the academy? All of those models are geared to increase transparency between education and the broader society. Unfortunately, the close coupling that used to exist between people's belief about education as a public good has unraveled somewhat in recent years. And so in making learning and student learning outcomes explicit and clear and transparent, we re-knit some of that belief and trust in higher education. Today, more than ever, we need to move from an orientation that talks about my course, what my course is about, to what our curriculum is all about. Doug mentioned community colleges, and I am very appreciative of the opportunity to be here as a representative of community colleges. We talked about pathways. Jeff, you talked about pathways, and that only 2% of American undergraduate students are taking what we might think of as the traditional pathway of going off to college. That's true. We are the other 99%, the rest of us who are not in elite private higher education. 45% of undergraduate students, over 12 million students, start their undergraduate careers at community colleges. Most of those who go into nursing and some of the other health professions, 40% of all of the undergraduate STEM students begin their careers at community colleges. Community colleges have for many years been dedicated to three things: access, affordability, and accountability. In the book College Unbound, which I found fascinating, Jeff talks about the attributes of mature organizations, and that higher education, traditionally described, is becoming or is a mature organization. I noticed that the cornerstone for Ithaca said 1892. Mid-Michigan Community College this year celebrates its 50th anniversary, and in fact, the oldest community college, Joliet, began in 1901. So perhaps we are less mature. Maybe that even makes us a little radical on occasion, but it makes us also nimble and gives us the opportunity to try new models and to make new connections between what happens in our classrooms and on our campuses and what the needs of our community really might be. Hence the word community college. Community colleges strive in that to be T-shaped organization in the breadth and depth, but perhaps in ways that are different from our four-year colleagues. That is, we cover a broad geographic market. More than 60% of community colleges are in rural areas. And in a society that is becoming even more and more urban, we see that that educating people in our rural geographic areas is an important part of our mission. How do we do that when we don't necessarily have access to major medical facilities, major research hubs? We do that by trying to build relationships and alliances, more than partnerships, alliances with our business and industry partners, including those in healthcare. We have breadth in geographic region and depth as well, because community colleges reach into K-12s on a pretty regular basis. We have over 900 dually enrolled students from K-12 schools in our region at mid, and we try to create a seamless transition between K-12, community college, and the four-year university. In the book College Unbound, Jeff talks a little bit about the role that the rankings play in the way that undergraduate education is structured. Community colleges are not driven by the rankings, but by responsiveness to communities. This assumes that our business and industry partners know what they want, and I think the important thing is that we have much discussion ahead of us to really determine whether or not we're on the same page as to what students need moving forward. We are driven not so much by research, but by workforce development, not so much by graduate education as by our K-12 partnerships. So as we think about the role and the pathway that students might have moving forward, we think about community colleges as a part of that pathway for students, and one that needs to be strengthened if we are going to provide a good launch for our students. Susan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you also for the opportunity to learn from all of you and think with all of you today, and to my colleagues. I would like to pick up on Jeff's theme of it not being an either or, and having lived that tension, all of my post-secondary education was at the oldest engineering school in the country, and I promptly moved to a small rural Midwest liberal arts college where I've been on the faculty for much of 30 years. And now the perspective I want to share from you is that of the Division of Undergraduate Education at the National Science Foundation, where I have the privilege of working with about 50 T-shaped individuals every day. We have social scientists, all kinds of scientists and engineers working very hard to find ways to support innovation in undergraduate education across the country. And another fascinating layer to that, you may or may not be familiar, a little over a year and a half ago, the federal government rolled out a 5-year strategic plan to improve STEM education. And I have the good fortune to convene the 14 federal agencies that are working on the undergraduate strategic objectives. So you're bringing together mission agencies that are primarily focused on workforce, and the Department of Education, the National Science Foundation, where education is a very high priority aligned with workforce, and thinking together about how we make this not in either or is a fascinating and important conversation. And as Jeff pointed out, in the current context, right, where we have these grand challenges that can't possibly be addressed by one individual, no matter how expert or T-shaped that individual is, we really need to push on developing these core competencies. And I'm thinking about things like the Convergence report that rolled out recently from the national academies, or the New Biology for the 21st Century report, where the next generation biologist may not even be a biologist. And there's the Education for Life and Work report, also digging deep into these intra and interpersonal skills that all of us need to be successful, not just in the workplace, but I think what's very interesting when you start to think about the intra and interpersonal skills that are aligned with persistence and success in college, Many of those are also tightly aligned with how much you earn over the course of your lifetime, your job satisfaction, and your health. So it's important for far more than the first or even the first job. And as you've noted, right, there are ways to begin to measure these competencies, but they're still very difficult to measure. The Board on Testing and Assessment at the National Academies has just been funded through our division to do a study on the broad range of measurement tools that are out there and to advise us on where the gaps are and which ones actually give us valid, reliable information that we can use. So that's kind of at the broad level of calling out that we need to think differently together, and we need to value diversity on all the possible axes of diversity that we can imagine. And so just briefly, some of the things that we're learning as we invest heavily in developing learning environments for individuals to go on and become highly flexible, highly adaptive members of society and contribute to the workforce. We've found it's very important to also apply what we know and are continuing to know about how people learn. So we can come up with all sorts of great ideas for how to create a learning environment, but if we want enduring learning, if we want to really get at all this critical thinking and problem solving, we need to apply what we know about how people actually learn so we'll be successful in the end. I wanted to share just a couple examples of this not either or approach that we're seeing in our portfolio. One is an effort that's spearheaded through our funding with the Business Higher Education Forum, looking at regional partnerships throughout the country. I'll pick one. The University of Maryland and Northrop Grumman are working together to develop cybersecurity employees of the future, and they're really interested in looking at all these regional alliances. How do we get these evidence-based practices that really help people learn into the curriculum in a way that aligns with what the workplace needs, and how do we mesh together the learning experience so that both industry and academia learn from each other and develop more robust programming? We've learned about this over 21 years with a program we have in place for community colleges, the Advanced Technological Education Program. And I'll pick just one example. Ann Beheeler runs the National Convergence Center. It does a lot with IT training. And Ann is just a model of pulling together T-based thinkers. She's aligned a total of 5 of our national centers now with our support to provide technical assistance to the awardees of the Department of Labor's TACT, which is, it's a long acronym, I'll spare you, but it's a workforce development program in community colleges similar to the ATE program, but bringing together all this experience to share with others. And what's really amazing about the National Convergence Center is that every quarter they have meetings with their industry partners to look at the currency of the curriculum for the students, to adapt it if necessary on the fly, and once a year for sure they revise and make sure that this learning experience is current and relevant. And there are a number of other ways we're bringing this into programs, with 4-year degree programs as well. And speaking about pathways, right, and not either or, we have a partnership with the Intel and GE Foundation to push on increasing the number of highly qualified computer scientists and engineers. And 2 of the experiments that are going that are really intriguing with pathways, one is at Hartnell College and Cal State Monterey Bay. It's a 3-year program with 1.5 years at each of the institutions to prepare low-income students for work in computer science. The working theory of action there is that it's very difficult, even with full financial support, for a low-income student to stay in school for a long period of time. If we can shorten the program but really make it high quality and make them well prepared, will we increase persistence? The other end of the spectrum, equally viable theory of action, the University of Washington and Washington State have partnered with, taking from the sports metaphor, a red shirt model. And in this case, they've developed a 5-year engineering program so that students from under-resourced high schools who are incredibly capable, very talented, but they didn't happen to have access to AP courses. They're not starting college with a 5 on the AP Calc score. And yet if they sat in a classroom with students who, just to be sure, even though they had that great Calc score already, are taking Calc 1 again, the playing field's not very even. So rather than having a remedial program, they're having a get-ready program in a positive, forward-looking way. And then, thinking about how global the world has begun, and as Jeff pointed out, right, who has access to global opportunities? Usually it's the more privileged students. The City University of New York has this wonderful global virtual entrepreneur program where students, even in community colleges, partner in an entrepreneurial way to build virtual businesses with students in China and other parts of the world. With our funding, some of those students have actually been able to get together in person, but they're developing all these skills. They're learning about the global environment in a generally cost-effective way. And we're also seeing, in terms of authentic experiences, and you'll note in the 2016 budget request from the president that at the undergrad level, we're pushing on creating more course-based research experiences. How do we scale the very best of the traditional research or design apprenticeship model and get more of that into the experiences of the typical first and second year students? So we're bringing it into the laboratory experiences in the strategic plan I mentioned. This is specifically called out, but it calls out for new partnerships, to think about industry-academic partnerships, for example. So the work isn't just what you would need to go on and perhaps become, the next PhD biologist, but someone that has experience that's relevant to a whole range of jobs. So I'm going to stop there and make one concluding remark. I think to have a really good T-shaped education, you need an education that's very integrated, and that there is some kind of scaffolding and guiding to help the student make sense of that. And as Jeff pointed out in his book, we are moving, much like the phone company did back in 1984, to an unbundled type of system, which gives us all sorts of flexibility. I think the real challenge for us is not whether, we're talking about online or face-to-face, but it's how we create a system that takes full advantage of these things we could never have done in education before, but helps the student both see and articulate, as you so beautifully explained, the value of how all the pieces of the puzzle fit together. Thanks.
Hi there, my name is John Beddick, and I'm facilitating this part of the discussion. If you would hold up questions if you have them, or tweet them as you've been asked already by Doug. Stephanie will take those. But let me start with one question for the 4 folks on our panel. And that is, does the current crisis of college affordability create kind of a key moment of opportunity around workplace and education collaboration and the joint development of T-shaped professionals? Someone want to take on that issue?
Well, I'll just comment that Duncan was referencing colleagues in the business sector saying that our business model is under attack. I think that we can sometimes feel that same way in higher education, but I would say that also means that we are posited for real opportunity in delivering knowledge and skills more effectively. In College Unbound, Jeff makes the comment that the major reason students don't finish the degree or go to college is the concern about cost. We are finding ways through co-op models, through apprenticeship models, through community colleges to try to address those cost considerations. For an in-district student at mid, the tuition for the degree the tuition, now there would be fees and you could be out of district, I get all of that, but the tuition for your degree would be $6,200. So effectively using community colleges to springboard and then reinvest that cost savings in other aspects, whether that's global travel or service learning or other kinds of experiences, can really save students some money.
I just want to make a brief comment. I think it does. There was a comment on Twitter during my talk about this kind of toggle between the workforce and education, and people say, well, doesn't that happen already? And it does. I mean, more students are working today than in previous generations, but many of them are not necessarily working in meaningful jobs. I mean, they're mostly working in jobs to pay their tuition bills. And so can we create and I think this is where we can't let employers off the hook. Can we create more meaningful work that is both meaningful from a professional development standpoint and, by the way, also pays, so that those students don't have to take just any job in order to help them through their undergraduate career. You know, somebody asked yesterday during dinner, you know, why don't more institutions do co-op models like, you know, Northeastern and Drexel and others. And, you know, and if you talk to any of those institutions, they'll talk about how difficult it is to find enough opportunities for their students that are both meaningful and that pay. So I think that's where the role of employers is going to be critical.
And employers in fostering completion for students too. So yes, I know that some employers are desperate for welders, really want those people from our geographic information systems. Terrific. Find ways for them to join your firm, but encourage them to complete the degree. That makes a world of difference for them long-term in their employment success.
Actually, that tees up the next, so to speak, the next question quite well, which is, Jeff, a real challenge for you from someone was the notion of if there are alternative pathways, will all of those alternative pathways be regarded by employers as legitimate pathways leading to good jobs? That is, as we see the kind of unbundled and unbound world, will we see good outcomes, in effect, coming from all of those different pathways as people look at it compared to the traditional pathway?
You know, I think so. It depends on the credential and the competencies of that student at the end. You know, we know, I mean, one of the things that I worry about the unbundled, and my thinking is actually moderated a little bit since my book came out, which is, I think, the sign of any author who admits that, you know, an idea that they had a couple of years ago may not necessarily work a couple of years later. But one of the things is that we know that a bachelor's degree today is not just a random collection of 120 credits. You know, there is a curriculum behind it. A curriculum makes sense. You were talking about scaffolding, right? So we have to have somebody at the end of the day has to be able to certify if we are going to move toward an unbundled future, or we're going to have multiple pathways where students are moving either between institutions or between employers or between experiences. Somebody at the end of the day has to certify that what that student did is worthy of a bachelor's degree or some sort of credential. And I think that this is where traditional colleges and universities have an incredible opportunity. You may not have students for 4 years in a residential experience, but you will have opportunities, I think, to certify those experiences, to have capstone experiences at the end. I mean, my feeling is that the bachelor's degree is still the best signal and will be for a very long time of preparedness for the job market. But that signal has a lot of noise around it right now, and so I think that offers a lot of opportunities for both employers and for institutions these days.
You know, could I add a concrete example to this? Because one of the things that we found, you know, in looking at what a range of institutions are doing is producing credentials is kind of the in thing. And where we've found real value is when those credentials are built in alignment with industry so they actually have value. Bellevue Community College in Washington State developed it's called the HIMSS certification, but it's for the health informatics group, and it's spread nationally. But I think the one example that really resonates with me is the National Association of Manufacturing. NAM has manufacturing credentials for two-year degree granting institutions for their programs. And we're really excited with what we saw happen in Florida. So through our Advanced Technological Education program, a whole suite of the community colleges in Florida got together and they figured out a way that they could transfer credits amongst those community colleges, right? Because students move rapidly among community colleges. It's very hard to follow them. And so they have the greatest completion of this certification because of this very flexible way they went about supporting students, and by using a nationally recognized credential, these students not only work hard and move around, but they move easily into the workplace afterwards.
Let me ask this question. One person raised the issue of, often we talk about the fact that the importance of a course is 16 weeks of me as a professor, or whatever is the case may be, and that academic freedom and the actual life of the faculty is a huge barrier potentially to unbinding education. So could you, any of you, pick up on the notion of what do we need to do to actually encourage and incentivize change within the faculty to be able to move to new models and to that deeper collaboration?
I usually don't touch questions about faculty.
I'll take a quick first stab at this. If you read the research on faculty motivation, what motivates faculty is a belief that their work matters. Do I have anybody who thinks that's an important motivator for what brings us to work every day? And their relationship with their students. Those two motivators relate very well to everything that we are about. We have got to stop thinking about the faculty as other, as problem child. We have got to engage the faculty because they want to see the progression of knowledge and skills through the curriculum, just as employers do, just as parents do, just as students in their more thoughtful moments do. So I think as I've talked with faculty over the years, there is a great receptivity to assessment, not as some sort of artificially imposed structure, but assessment in terms of knowing whether students are really accumulating the knowledge and skills throughout the curriculum. We have much work to do. This is important work. It's not easy work, but it's not impossible work either.
And John, I'm sorry. Just chime in really quickly. As I was reading the book, I mean, this is organizational change. We talked about, Chris mentioned that this is a business model under attack in higher education too. And this is all about organizational change. So this is central to Jeff's book. As I think about the higher education culture, there's a really great article that I read on Fast Company that I love, and it's really appropriate after all my years in corporate experience, is that you can put together the best strategy in the world, but culturally strategy for lunch every time. And if you listen to the comments that came from our interviews, this was all about culture change and trying to do something different. And they realize how difficult that is, and I think that's really central to this. Sorry.
Now, let me just say, before I ask this last question, a couple of quick logistic notes and what's going to happen with the rest of these questions. We are going to post all of the questions and ask people to, in effect, respond to them. Because the fact that your questions are extremely important, unfortunately, we don't have time for all of them if we're going to get on to the rest of the morning. But many people raise the question of structural inequality, of racism in America, and other kinds of isms that very well may have the college experience be an unequal experience and have unequal outcomes. Now, as we look at an education change for the 21st century, what does this now portend in relation to dealing with issues of inequality that was a huge issue in the 20th century, already a big issue in the 21st century?
I mean, the note I want to make on that is around these pathway ideas. I mean, many will note that people are already doing these now, and I think it's usually people with access to both knowledge and finances. And if we're going to create alternative pathways, they have to really be for everybody. We have to have the support structures in place, both the advising support structures and the financial support structures. What really worries me when I give talks about College Unbound is the economics of the nation, particularly of the middle class. As I note in a talk that I give, there are 450 counties in the U.S. with more younger people than older people. 350 of them, so all but 100, have lower median incomes than the national average. These are the future college students, and these are your future employees. So if we don't figure this out, we're in real trouble. And then just one other add, and I know Susan, I think, wants to make a point too, is about the idea of employers or faculty. On the faculty point, I heard A.G. Lafley, the CEO of P&G, speak at a conference a couple of years ago about the power of the liberal arts. He went to Hamilton College in upstate New York, and how great the liberal arts are, and how how P&G really values liberal arts college graduates. And then I talked to many people in his human resources department, and they said, well, that's all fine and good that he says that, but he doesn't hire any entry-level college graduates. And so we're actually looking for X, Y, and Z, even though he says, as the CEO of the company, this is what we're looking for. And this is the idea of employers. We keep talking about employers as a group, and I think Deb knows this from the work that AAC&U does when they survey employers. But the CEO, the chief human resources officer, and the line manager are not in complete alignment about what they need out of today's college graduates. And so if faculty are just going to be blamed for not following the whims of employers, well, I actually in some places don't blame them, because you actually don't even know what employers really want all the time.
Yeah, and I just wanted to underscore that, John, I think the real challenge, if you look at the recent stuff that's come out of the Pew Foundation, everything, is the wealth gap is our current challenge. And if you look at 1965 to today, the probability that you were going to finish college if you were from the lowest quartile in socioeconomic status versus the higher socioeconomic status, the graph is just has gone like this. And work out, actually, Tony Carnevale's analysis, some of the data, when you then look at students and you use SAT scores or proxy SAT scores, the odds that you are going to finish a 4-year degree if you're from the lowest SES quartile is about a quarter of that. Well, it's about half, as if you were from the highest SES quartile for the highest ability students in the country. So it's not a lack of ability. There are a lot of other factors going on, and if we don't address that, we are not going to have the workforce we need.
But good news on that front. If you look at some of John Hattie's research on visible learning, and you look at education is the way to narrow that gap. It is the road out of income inequality for many, many people. And what does that require? It requires learning that has agreed upon student learning outcomes. More powerful than poverty is learning that has transparent, measurable student outcomes. There's good research to support that. It fits ideally with the T-shaped model that we're all considering today. So we should not despair.
Well, let me do two things, and then let us finally thank our panel. First of all, we are going to be on break the minute that I quit talking in a moment. And you need to follow the map to your rooms. The refreshments will be in the room. So we will talk to you later today about the different inputs that you're doing and how we're going to continue to capture those and continue the conversation. But please help me in thanking this wonderful panel in Jetsalinga.